Today's guest is an avid recreational angler. He developed his fishing passion at a young age, ahead of his deep technology background. Professionally, he has been at the forefront of online learning, data analysis methods, and artificial intelligence since the early days. You might wonder, why is a guy with a background such as this on a podcast focused on the tackle and tactics used in surf, fly, and inshore fishing? As I stated above, the passion for fishing came first. After a 35-year career in ed tech, he has shifted his focus to solving some fishing and fisheries policy issues with technology and data analysis. Please welcome my good friend Luyen Chou to the Saltwater Edge podcast. How you doing, man?
I'm great, Peter. Thanks for having me on. It's really fun to do this with you.
Yeah, well, I'm excited because I think one of the questions I would ask you early is, I'm pretty sure you grew up in New York City. And I know you had a strong fishing momentum in your life when we met, maybe just about after college, right? About that time.
Yeah.
Right? And so, but prior to that, how did you you grew up in New York City. How did fishing become a part of your life? I think your dad was a composer or something, right? So is he a fisherman? How did that come?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a unusual journey. Let's just put it that way.
Yep.
I grew up in the middle of New York City in Greenwich Village, far away from, or at least at the time, I thought far away from any productive fishing.
Yep.
My parents didn't fish at all. It was actually my mom's brother, younger brother, my Uncle David,
Okay.
who had been an obsessed fisherman since they were little kids growing up in China. They used to stock swimming pools with fish, and he'd go there with a little cane pole and a worm, and they'd catch fish, for a penny or a nickel or whatever it was at the time. And he ended up living on Long Island, in the middle of the island, up by Cold Spring Harbor.
Sure.
His sons became big fishermen, and they were the ones who really got me into fishing. And some of the very earliest pictures of me in our family albums are, and I must be like 3 or 4. I'm standing in almost every one of those pictures. I have a orange Plano tackle box and a little Zebco all-in-one.
Getting after it.
Casting outfit.
That's great. That's great. I got a similar one in the back of my grandfather's boat, just holding onto this rod while he was trolling. But anyway, it's a journey, right? And it starts, but you got to find that passion. I think that passion is something I know was fully formed after. By the time I met you after college, I remember you and Thorne, a mutual friend of ours, with I think it was missions to Chatham in that beat up whaler, right? Did you?
Yeah. So Thorne and I went to college together.
Okay.
And we started fishing together. We discovered that we had this shared passion for fishing when we were in college. And actually, very funny story. Our girlfriends at the time were really close friends, and they ran this dance company for young kids around town up in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And so they were gone all weekend long in the mornings. And Thorne and I realized, hey, we can go fish. And so I learned a ton from Thorne, and he remains one of my best friends in the world. And we've since then fished all over the world together.
Sure.
We both ended up back in New York City at some point after college, and just tried to spend as much of our free time fishing as we could. And it was kind of around then. I'd been a saltwater fisherman growing up, but then had sort of switched to trout when I got excited and interested in fly fishing. And it was right around those early 90s that a number of us began to realize that we were sitting on this incredible hidden gem of a saltwater inshore, nearshore fishery right in New York City. And
Jamaica Bay and all that, and the rivers. Yeah.
Jamaica Bay, the river, Hudson and East River, the whole New York Bight area, obviously the Sound and the South Shore. But I actually, so Thorne, as you remember, Peter, because I think you were critical in that early story, started this bulletin board, this website called Real Time.
Yes. Yeah, I was the Rhode Island correspondent. Thorne and David were doing Cape Cod, and I said, "What about Rhode Island?" So I jumped on. I made Thorne nuts. I don't think I spelled deceiver the same way each week. So I know he's going to remember this. If he listens to this, he's gonna. We just
I
got
know
a
he'll
chuckle out of
listen
him.
to it.
But
And
anyway,
he
back to
always
real time.
speaks fondly about you in those early days. But I actually wrote an article for Real Time back in 1992 called "The Big City's Big Secrets," and it was about the fishery, the saltwater fishery,
Yeah.
and so really since 92, I've been an avid New York urban saltwater angler, and then have been fishing my way east to the eastern end of Long Island ever since.
So, because I think, like I said, I was curious about the finding the fishing passion growing up in New York City, and now it makes all a lot of sense. And when we met, like I said, you were already engaged with it, and I know you've had a long career in tech, in data analysis, and I heard a podcast you did with Tony over at the Guide Association, and you described the very earliest part of artificial intelligence, right? Which was to solve you take it, but it was the cross.
Well, my senior project in high school was trying to write a AI program that would beat a human in tic-tac-toe, and I completely failed at that.
Yeah, you said 9 boxes, and you saw you had a hot mess, right?
Yeah, I was just talking about this the other day. Tic-tac-toe is the world's dumbest game, right? You can teach a 2-year-old to play an adult to a draw. There are 9 positions. There's 2 pieces. It really is a ridiculous game. But what most people don't know is there's something like 64,000 move combinations. So back then, when we were doing quote unquote artificial intelligence, you would have had to have 64,000 if-then statements, if you remember those
to produce the outcome.
To produce the outcome. And I literally at that time, you couldn't write a program with that many lines in it, so I couldn't complete it.
It was a when I heard that story, I was like, there's a demonstration of maybe what you had for technology then compared to what you have now. And you're taking, we were involved together in real time then, and bulletin boards were the thing. And they were first used, very interesting. Among the first uses of them were steelhead fishermen in the Pacific Northwest and deadheads trading set lists. That's the original use of listservs turned into bulletin boards. This is all Netscape, AOL, You've Got Mail, so long ago that some people are going to be, what are those guys talking about? So let's get to fishing. Okay. But, so you've developed an app, you've shifted your attention and your talent to your passion. And the idea of finding a more effective fishing log. There's a lot of products out there that are fishing tools and things like that. But I will tell you, and one of the reasons I was very interested in having you on was many of my podcast guests. I've done 22, 3 podcasts, right? And I ask them, what's a tip every podcast? And 2/3 of the time, at least, it's keep a log. And maybe they all do, but don't think of it. And I've had one of the guys who I just talking to recently. One of the things he commented was, "Yeah, I kept it, and I regret he had a computer failure or something. He lost some stuff, and he hasn't really got back in the saddle, and I regret that." And so, the idea of using a fishing log to track your fishing activities and maybe find some patterns and some things like that is very enviable. Makes a lot of sense, or whatever that would be. But it's practically your tic-tac-toe problem, right? It's so many different, you got to get in the habit, the data you want to collect, when you do it, how good your memory is. All these things are factors that make it harder to do to keep an accurate fishing log. So I'll tell you a story. My grandfather, he was in Buzzards Bay, and he had this journal that he kept his stripers in and his birds. And I had a long plane trip, and I took a piece of graph paper and I charted each of the entries. Most of 18 years. And they weren't crystal clear. There was some notations he made to himself that I couldn't understand, but I could read everything. But in the end, when I looked at it all, it said, go fishing in Buzzards Bay in June. I mean, that's not news, right? That's a, and so you really need to slice this stuff in a relevant way to make it useful to you personally, right? And so I think when I've seen your app, and it's called GotOne, I saw that you kind of began with the end in mind, and maybe worked a little bit backwards to create a product that was easy to use,
Yeah.
and produced some of the benefits that my whole, I don't know how long it was, but that whole graphing exercise was not short, and it produced not much for data, right? And so, could you give us a basic overview of what the problem you're trying to solve with GotOne as it relates to the fisherman's, benefit of the fisherman?
Yeah, it's a great question, great framing of it. So I like the other guests that you've had on your show who talk about the fishing logs. I long kept a log, and all of the master fishermen that I learned from and who mentored me always said, look, the most important thing you can do if you want to get better at this thing called fishing is to keep accurate records of your catches, because our memories are incredibly limited and faulty. They're subject to revision and bias, and we're always embellishing and then not even realizing that we're embellishing. And frankly, the more you fish, the harder it is to remember what's actually happened in any kind of meaningful way. And so I kept a log for many years, and my log, I mean, it goes back to when pre-computer, I was doing it on stenographic notepads. There you go.
I just jumped out of the screen to get this.
Yeah.
This is an old day timer, if you remember those, right? Catalog thing, and it's got the months, and I have a card, and I keep track of a handful of things like part of the tide, top of the outgoing, mid out, bottom out. The weather, clear, partly cloudy, overcast, whatever, the surf, calm, light, just the right amount of rough, too rough, and those are somewhat arbitrary. But the instinct to keep a record is strong. The ability to do something with it is
something else. Yeah, well, Peter, we're gonna take all those note cards, those daytimer cards, and we're gonna get them in a GotOne for you. So like that, we'll do that after this podcast. But yeah, I mean, I did the same thing. I didn't need to even do it as meticulously and in as organized a way as you did. I just had pads of paper. Eventually, it became Microsoft Word.
Yeah.
Eventually, it became Excel. But it's anyone who's kept a log knows it is hard to maintain. And you're standing in the water in waders. You're on a boat. You're trying to help someone play and land a fish or release a fish, and the last thing you're thinking about doing is taking meticulous notes on what happened and looking up the tide and remembering the moon phase and the current and the water temperature. So despite best intentions, most of us, and even the most experienced, I think actually even particularly the most experienced anglers, we just can't keep up with it. I don't know one angler who's really kept up with it throughout their angling career.
Not me.
Sure I'm sure there's some. But so and then the other thing that sort of got me thinking about this idea of an app was as a data-driven guy, it pains me every time I'm at a bar with a bunch of guides and fishermen, and we have the conversation that we have had for so many years and generations. It's really the 3 days after the full moon that are the best for striped bass. No. It's the 3 days before the new moon. No, you really want only the 100% full moon. And I kept saying to myself, as a data person, this is not like, is vanilla better than chocolate? This is knowable. We have enough data around our catches if we actually paid attention to put these kinds of questions to bed once and for all, let alone questions like what water temperatures are optimal for different species? What time of year did I catch this species last year and over the last 10 years, particularly with changes in climate and environment and local changes and changes in bait populations and so forth. So many years ago, actually, it occurred to me that your mobile phone was an incredible fish logging device if you could set it up that way, because your phone knows what time it is, what date it is, and where you are. And And if you tell it you caught a fish, it can also go out to the vast sort of internet of scientific information out there that's available through interfaces with things like weather buoys and satellites and so forth, and can fill in all of the environmental data for you without your having.
Just not going to remember later that night.
That's right.
Or you're too tired when you get home from surf fishing, or for me, I fish in the mornings before work, and then I get off the boat and it's really right into work. There's no recording. It's been worse this year than ever for that reason.
Right. And so though that was kind of when I decided, actually even before I decided to build the app myself, I thought someone's going to build this. It just seems really obvious. And there are fishing apps out there, and there are even fishing apps that have some kind of logging capability, but I never found one that I felt was really designed by anglers like us. It was designed by people who wanted to create Facebook for a new market for fishermen, right? And it was more about tracking where you were, sharing your brag photo with someone, and actually more often than not, about burning your fishing spot. And that is not what I'm interested in. I'm interested in getting just very detailed and focused and actionable insights about the fish that I catch and understanding the trends in that data. And so I finally said, well, I've got to just build this thing because no one else is actually doing it, which was shocking to me. And so I built a prototype 2 seasons ago. I learned more in 2 years of using that prototype than I had in 45 years of fishing.
Yeah.
And finally, it was really last fall I decided to take the plunge and build it as a generally available consumer app.
Yeah. Wow. The actionable insights was the takeaway. Because that whole graphing project with my grandfather, not really. This box of, I don't know, many, there's a couple hundred entries, 500 or 600 entries in here anyway. You gotta take out August and read it, card by card and then, it's crazy. And I know folks have kept some logs on like a database, like a spreadsheet, right? And they might keep some of those same things about, time of tide or surf condition or wind direction, and be able to search a little bit around, I don't know, northwest wind, what spots. So they see the spots they fished on the northwest wind and they go, boom, boom, these couple were pretty good. That makes some sense, but that also is, you're collecting data. It's only as good as the data that goes in, and the phone use is the instant that makes that data better, right?
So here's to your point about my sort of non-fishing activities. This is something I really learned from being in the data analytics world in education, which is the key isn't just collecting lots of data. Actually, the key is, how do you make it as seamless, easy, and simple to collect data while maximizing the amount of insight that you provide?
Well done. Well said. Yeah.
So I learned this in education. You don't want to have to collect 1,000 different data points on a student to understand what they learned. You want to really distill it to, what are the smallest number of things that I can be measuring that give me the maximum amount of understanding about where that student is in their learning journey? So I took that same approach to GotOne to say, what's the fewest number of taps, clicks, voice commands that you could use to get the maximum amount of insight about your fishing?
Sure. Do you think, let me take a look at my notes here, because one of the hardest things is to get started, right? And develop the routine, 90 days or 10,000, whatever. There's something to creating that, but and recording the essentials. That's what you would then you end up with, like with my grandfather's. There was data, sure, but it wasn't, and it was a lot of it in terms of duration, but it wasn't. It didn't produce much in terms of insight, So I think there's some things that when you look at it, some conditions are fixed and some are variable, right? Tide is fixed, moon is fixed, wind is variable, weather conditions variable, right? And so capturing that stuff and then I think is be a critical difference between the things you can look up later and be reasonably accurate on. It's really probably the variable things that make the most difference in the end, or at least are contribute a good deal to your success. So let's take a minute and I made a little list of what the benefits of a log would be and talk through those maybe, and then maybe we do a screen share and you can show people a little bit. All right. But I thought about logs and it's the patterns, that whole idea of fish in Buzzards Bay in June. I mean, there's some obvious and some subtle, right? And I think we both recognize that as you think about a fishing spot, there's really a spot within a spot sometimes. Block Island, sure, the south side of Block Island, sure, but there's some more inside of that. So patterns, they help you make decisions in the future. Like it can inform your future, in terms of like as a guide. But it doesn't produce an answer per se. It gives you some educated guesses, I guess is the way to think about it. And then, so I think to me, that's really what a fisherman would be looking for, a little bit of like, how should I be spending my time? I think some people can walk outside, feel the wind and know they should probably go over here and be successful because they have such a wealth of knowledge. Many more of us are closer to our truth is we get to fish some and we have some data, right? But we'd like to make the most of it. It's not that we get out 5 or 6 nights a week and are so tight to it. So I think the data that you collect in this kind of situation that you can then analyze by wind direction or something like that would be a helpful guidance, and it might be, I think you said earlier that there's folks that fish a lot that might have a hard time remembering things because they have so many interactions. But I also feel like, gosh, I haven't been on the water in 5 or 6 days, and you feel like you've lost your, context. And I think here in New England, anyway, we kind of have 10 2-week seasons. What was working 2 weeks ago, that previous moon, baits changed, water temperatures changed, variables along the way, but there is a larger rhythm that if you can tap into it, by keeping a good log, I think that would be a very worthwhile exercise.
Yeah.
Anything? What would be some other advantages in your mind to keep a log?
I mean, I think you nailed it, but I think sometimes it's even the simplest little things. So I mentioned this anecdote to Tony when we were talking on his podcast, but last year, and this actually connects nicely with the Albie tagging project that you've been involved with, and the Guides Association's been involved with, and many of our friends. So last year, actually second year in a row, I remember last year we had a tough albie season. We had an early push of albies here around Montauk and inside Gardner's Bay. Sort of Labor Day to early mid-October, and then they disappeared for a few weeks. And then there was a push of fish kind of late in October, and then you started to see the doom and gloom set in, and a lot of folks were deciding to pull their boats. And we had some weather, and people were just grumpy about the terrible albie season.
Or season, I'll do it. Grumpy,
man, and. So, I mean, this is so stupidly simple, but I went back to the logs that I had kept through GotOne over the last couple of seasons, and I wrote on a bunch of discussion forums and actually showed the data. I said, hey, guys, my best days in the last 2 seasons for albies by far were at the second half of November. Don't pull your boats. They're going to show up. And nobody listened to me, and most of the boats got pulled around here.
Those end up being bigger, too.
Yeah, they were bigger fish. They were more plentiful. They were hungrier.
I know it's true of bonito. That last wave of bonito are bigger.
And it's true with the albies too. And I will tell you, it was like clockwork last season. It was right between the 14th and the 20th. They just showed up everywhere. And it was maybe me and maybe one or two other boats, and everyone else had pulled their boats. And I just wouldn't have known. That was my season. That was my albie season. I would not have known to be in the water and fishing as hard as I was had I not had that data. And that wasn't sophisticated data, right? That was just looking at a graph of when I caught the most albies over the last couple of seasons. And what was funny about it was Tony kind of confirmed this, because he said to me, "Oh, look, we're getting all these the information from last year's tagging, and here are all these fish that were tagged in late November, right around your neck of the woods." And I said, "Yep, I was catching them." So just one example that's relatively simplistic, but the more sophisticated
point. I mean, the there's an argument. You and I had a discussion about it previously. Is that the keeping a log can only kind of inform and guide. You know what I mean? It's not going to be there as an answer. It doesn't really provide answers. Answers come from reason, and reason comes from the past, right? So you're not going to have and especially, like you say, we have a pretty dynamic situation with water temperatures and all those variables we mentioned earlier. Water temperature is regularly rising now, but all the other variables about wind direction and some of those things that you can't, really.
As they always say on, with other products, your results may vary.
Totally.
It'll give you context, but so that's a fairly simplistic example. But I was reminded, actually, you made me think of something when you were talking about sort of how you've thought of using this data in the past.
Yeah.
Out here and in most of the coastal fisheries, most spots that we fish very differently, for instance, on different tides. There are spots all around here, particularly flat spots, that are incoming tide spots only. They really only fish on the incoming tide. There are other spots that are really outgoing tide spots. There are other places that are actually kind of, low slack spots. And sometimes you can kind of figure out why that might be from the structure or from outflows or creeks or whatever. But a lot of times it's just experience. And for many, many years, you build this kind of, this intuition based on experience of which spots to fish when. But boy, I can't tell you how reaffirming it is to see that come alive in the data. And in certain cases, actually, for your intuitions to be disproven. There are spots that I thought for sure were incoming tide spots, and I've realized now, looking at the data, now they fish equally well on both tides. It just has to be the same tide stage, whether it's incoming or outgoing.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, and I remember a conversation with I think of the guides, whether they're charter guys like Robbie Taylor and BJ and some of those guys in my town, or I remember a conversation with Paul Dixon, how much of his focus is on current speed, not tide. These guys don't talk about tide; they talk about current speed, right? Robbie and BJ and those guys being the spot within the spot. I mean, these guys, the reason I bring them up by name is they're on the water. They're the busiest guides around, the guys we just mentioned, and they're on the water all the time. And so they've got a lot of knowledge. They're smart to start with, you know what I mean? But it might benefit from having this kind of a system, but there's a lot that they've acquired over time, and their intuition is so good. But if you turn into a recreational angler like you and me, as passionate as you could be, you're still on the short end of the stick. We
just don't have as many data points. And so
exactly
we have
right.
to maximize the data points that we have to become a better angler, to even approximate how well those folks fish.
Yeah. So let's talk about exactly that, data points. One of the best tips is to record the data as soon as it happens, right? And so that's my segue, and I'll screen share with you to GotOne, because that's basically the gist of where you take the baton from what the other systems may or may not have done, right? It is, you use voice and touch, and use your phone, and the phone does a lot of the work. The stuff that you're not going to remember later, the stuff that more detail than you could possibly have, let alone the time you caught the fish. I mean, and honestly, if the fishing's good, all that memory goes out the window. So let me give you the screen.
Sounds good.
I've made a mess, I think. Do you have it?
Let me try it now. I think you still have to throw me permission.
Yeah, let me back out of this again. There it is. Sorry, multiple participant there. Yeah, that's the one.
I got it.
I was sharing mine for a second. All my hot mess.
Does that work?
It's coming up.
Yeah, let me make sure I got the right screen here.
That's kind of looks like a short screen.
Yeah. Can you see it there?
Yes, now I can. Great.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I mean, this has GotOne, and as I said, we tried to make this interface as simple and foolproof as possible. Big buttons, voice, no tiny little fields to fill in unless you want to fill in more data. So, and by the way, I love to tell people this has been a family project. So my daughter, who's an incredible logo designer and illustration,
fun.
the logo for GotOne, and you'll see the illustrations of the fish are done by her roommate Isabel, who never caught a fish in her life, but now knows more about how to represent coastal fish species, and
That's
probably
great.
one other than a professional fish painter. So this big glowing button here, that is really it, right? So all you have to do is to tap that to log a fish.
Yep.
Or you can use the microphone. So if I tap the microphone, I could use my voice to log it. But let me just do it by touch first. So we're just going to touch the big button. It's going to allow me to select what species I caught. So I don't know, let's go with a red drum for now.
Sure.
It knows the general size, length limits of a particular species. So let's say this is a 25-inch fish, and that's it. You're done.
Yeah.
GotOne now is going out and retrieving all of the information and data that it needs in order to in order to conclude, make its log entry, right?
Sure.
So now, like if I pull up from the bottom here, you can see all the fish that I've logged, right?
Yeah.
So let's I don't know, let's look at this striped bass over here, right? So this will show me the fish that I caught, the length, the time and date of the catch. It'll show me on the map where I caught it. I can zoom in and out of the map to see where I caught it. And then if I scroll down, it'll show me the conditions. And remember, I didn't punch in these conditions. These conditions are coming from...
Well, it'll be right there on the tides. I hadn't focused on it in that way. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that in and of itself is just hugely useful to me, because I don't have to remember in the heat of the battle what the tide is, what the moon phase is, what the water temperature is, and yet those are critical pieces of data for my fishing.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting and really cool also is we wanted to be able to provide aggregate insights. So if I go back to my log, here are all the fish I caught. If I tap on charts, it starts to show me all of the aggregated information about these fish. So what temperature, what water temperatures was I caught the most fish on, what moon phases, what date, what location, and so on. And this is just the beginning. These reports, as we get more data, are going to get more and more sophisticated.
Sure.
And one thing that people often ask about, and Peter, you and I were talking about this earlier, is about data privacy and about protecting your fishing data. So
your unique data, the data that your
unique data, right? And this is something that I think is problematic in a lot of the other fishing apps that we see out there, which is that they by default share your exact location, not only the location where you caught the fish, but your entire fishing outing is mapped and shared online with other users. You can often turn that off, but generally by default, those things are on. It's hard to get much value from the app unless you have that on. Yeah. So we do show the location of your catch, but only you see the precise location.
Yep.
And so, and the data isn't shared with other users at this point. We will at some point allow you to share your specific log information with selected friends, but this isn't broadcast to everybody.
Yeah.
The one thing we do, and the reason that this is kind of a dual purpose app, it's both for fishermen, but also has a conservation agenda to it and a marine science agenda to it. We share the aggregated data with qualified researchers and fisheries management people, but we generalize the location data into multi-mile increments. So you will see this specific location of where you caught the fish.
Right. That puts my heart in my throat, right?
Yeah,
seeing that picture, but it's my picture.
It's your picture. No one else will see that. The researchers will see something that is in a multi-mile increment. And frankly, the researchers have told us
that's plenty.
What they care about. They don't need that much fidelity for location.
Mile increment is adequate for their purposes, right? So 15 miles from Newport to Block Island. It's also 15 miles from Montauk to Block Island. That's and I know you fish Watch Hill some too. So, I mean, that area right there is big, and it's might be 18 miles at some points, but I mean, it's basically, that's the area we're talking about. You caught a fish. You caught a 24-inch striped bass on May 5th at 10:52.
Right. That's right.
Right. That fish in that bucket of data.
Yeah. And your exact specific location will never be shared unless you choose to share it. And that's the commitment of the GotOne app.
This seems to me to be the better than the Instagram equivalent of fuzzing the background in a lot of the fish pictures that people do post. You know what I mean? It's more than that. You know, it's a rigorous effort to keep what's yours personal, but make a relevant contribution to science. Because in a conversation I had with Tony, he said literally, if 1% of the fishermen use this, we'll have exponentially more data than we've ever had. The big knock on recreational fishermen is the lack of recreational data, right? On effort and things like that. And the commercial guys got data because they count the dead fish, right? It's easier to get their data. But there's some other reasons too that scientists and managers would be really happy to have this. It'll help with research and stock assessments. This is automated, right? So it's going to go to whoever is authorized, that kind of thing. But as it relates to the data itself, it's not that phone survey, how was fishing last year, where your recollection is poor, right? And the where and the when is poor. And they then have to enter that data, right? Here, it's much more efficient for them to use more data, right?
So maybe talk a little bit about that. And actually, even before I do that, you made me think of something else, Peter, which is a lot of times anglers, even with the best intentions and even with a tool like GotOne, forget to log their fish in the heat of the moment, or they do want to get back to the dock, or even the next day. And so one of the things we added as a feature this summer is you can edit your catches, or you can even log a catch after the fact, and then reset the time, date, and location, and it will pull in the correct environmental data. So here, I mean, just to give you an example, let's take this fish here, which this is obviously bogus because I logged it in the middle of Texas, but where I was yesterday. But if I tap this little in the upper right corner, the little pencil icon, right, I can change the species, I can change the size, but more importantly, I can change the date, right? Let's say this was several days earlier. It was, in the middle of the night. And you know what? It wasn't in Texas. It was actually, way up here, right? And I can zoom in to get the exact location. When I click on, and there are other things you can change, you can fine tune the conditions. So you see it actually changed the wind and the tide based on the new location and time and date. But maybe, sometimes anglers have a much more finely calibrated understanding of what the water temperature is in some sensor buoy out there. So you can change this manually, and then you can even put in additional details like did I release the fish, what depth did I catch it at, I caught it with a fly. I can enter my notes about the catch,
maybe what fly.
Yeah, exactly. And once you do that, it'll update all that data, and now this fish will have much more accurate location, time, and all of the environmental data.
Yeah.
And so you could really go back and enter your log entries from weeks past and just adjust the date, time, and location right from your box. And the thing that we're about to launch later this summer, which I'm really excited about, is you'll be able to, by the end of the summer, actually log your catches with a photograph.
Wow.
So either by just taking a photograph of your catch in the app itself or uploading a photo from your photo album, it will actually use that to create the log entry. And if you have location services and time and date on your photos, you don't have to. But if you do, it will actually pre-populate all of that as well in the log entry. And then the last thing I was just going to show is you talked about sort of this. We were talking about the science aspects of this. So, and I know that this has been talked about in some of the other podcasts and videos that we've done, but we've been starting to launch partnerships with leading conservation and management organizations. The first big one is with the Massachusetts Division of Marine Fisheries, which many of your listeners, Peter, will know, has been leading a multi-year study in the relationship between how recreational anglers catch and release fish, what bait they use, where the fish are hooked, how long they have them out of the water, environmental conditions, and the mortality of those fish as they're released back in the water. If you in the past, if you wanted to participate in that study, you had to fill out a physical note card, just like the ones in your little index card box there. As of this summer, you can now participate in the MassDMF study right through the GotOne app. So you'll see up here in the edit log screen, there's a Striper study tab. If I tap on that, you'll see the Massachusetts Division of Marine Fisheries logo, and I can now modify the data and also add additional data like landing time, release time, hook location, number of hooks, level of blood, the swim ability once it's released, the lure type.
Their paper survey.
And then that all goes weekly to MassDMF researchers, and they are putting together a public dashboard that helps us to understand the relationship between those factors and striped bass mortality.
Brings up 2 points for me, Lou. First one, is that maybe even more data than they would have asked for on a paper survey?
So we actually, the environmental data, they don't ask for so much. They do want water temperature and air temperature. We give them all sorts of environmental data that they don't ask for, but they also ask for a lot of data that we don't ordinarily ask for from GotOne anglers. But we were able to take all the data that they asked for in this elaborate note card system and put it into this tab. So if you don't want to participate in the study, you never see those additional data fields. But if you want to participate and be a citizen science and contribute to the MassDMF study, it unlocks a whole bunch of additional fields for you to enter.
Yeah, wow, that's really something. I'm unfortunately forgot what my second point was, but yeah, I mean, to me, that's one of the things that's really exciting. And the Guide Association has been very involved in striped bass, false albacore, redfish, and I just see opportunities for this to make a contribution across all of them. And I think a lot of us anglers recognize sort of a long-term view, and it's completely in line with some of the other beliefs of the Guide Association. And we go where the science goes. And one of the dings on rec is that we don't have good science, one of the criticisms. So here's a way to go get it and leverage that technology so that, they can make the best use of it without us giving up private, closely held info.
That's right.
I do remember what my second point was. How I've participated in some of this stuff, but you never get anything useful back.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Mentioned that they're going to do a dashboard for the Massachusetts guys participating. So they're going to put their data in and get something back, a tool they can use.
Yeah. Yeah. No. And actually, I can, I'm going to share my screen again.
Okay.
Because I will show you. what that looks like, because they are just launching this now. So actually, sorry, that's the wrong screen. Let me get the right one here. Here. Okay, so here you go. Here's a striped bass citizen science dashboard, and you can see fish caught by date, by air and water temperature.
Wow.
You can see fish reported by tackle type.
This is Massachusetts, so there'll be some fish caught north of the Cape and south of the Cape, so the temperature thing would be pretty variable, I would guess.
Well, actually, it's even broader than that, because they are allowing people to enroll from anywhere, any striped bass angler. So I participate this, and I fish mostly, as you know, in New York and Rhode Island waters. We've already contributed several dozen fish logs worth of data through GotOne. We only launched this about a week and a half ago, but you can see the extent of the data. You know, fish size by, we poor fly anglers, Peter, look at this. We catch the tiniest fish of everybody. So if you get a big fish on fly, you should be really proud of yourself, because it's the bait guys and the bottom guys who are clearly cleaning up on the big fish.
We're great.
This is really fascinating, right? Like, you look at fight and handling time versus fish size. So you can actually see how much longer it takes to land a fish as it gets bigger. You can look at hook location by tackle, injury by tackle. So this is just the beginning, but imagine this as a multi-year collection of data. We will have a much deeper understanding of what leads to the health of striped bass once we release them, and how we should fish for them in order to maintain the population of bass.
One of the things from the Albie shootout, or the Albie study, that was pretty interesting was, we tagged, I think, 73, and 68 pinged initially, and then 2 more pinged at Long Island. So there, I think you see Albie sometimes, you're like, boy, that one's not going to make it. They appear to be more durable, because in that study we were doing catch, surgery, and release. They appear to be more durable than anyone would have realized. The post-release mortality, small sample, absolutely less than striped bass.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Really interesting.
Crap, you know what I mean? More. Anyway, so a couple questions about the product again. And I know you have this commitment to the data and the privacy. And it's pretty simple. I think you had a nice little demo you just did. What does the free version get, and what are some of your near future plans? Because I know that there's plans for a paid version that has more features, but can you kind of give us a little bit of a roadmap of what's ahead?
Yeah, sure. So the big feature that we're working on now, and we actually got a very, very generous grant from the Saltwater Guides Association and from Hatch Outdoors to do this, is adding the photo logging capability. So the ability to log your catches by photo. But that is what I'm really excited. So that's going to be great. And what's the one thing any angler does, rec angler does, when they catch fish, to take a picture of it. So if you can, by taking the picture, actually create the log entry, that just, again, simplifies and streamlines everything. So I'm very excited about that. That will be available before the end of the season. But the longer term roadmap for photo logging, which we're working on now, and that I'm super excited about, is, so I'm actually a board member of the Global Fish AI Consortium. And you mentioned my background in AI. There's a global community of really exceptional researchers, AI researchers, marine biologists, technologists, conservationists, who have been working together on global standards, models, sharing information around fish identification through photography.
Really?
And so we already are working with a couple of groups where we have prototypes of the ability to identify fish species in the photographs with which you log your fish catch in GotOne. So very soon you'll have the ability not only to log your catch through the photo of the fish, but that photo will then render a judgment about the species with a confidence level, and you can say, "Yep, that's right. It was a cobia."
I see.
And beyond species, the real vision that we have with GotOne is the ability to accurately measure length.
Yeah,
which means we could actually measure girth, and which means in most cases we could do an estimation of weight. So we can actually get critical measurements of your fish without you having to spend more time handling the fish, measuring it, putting on a boga, whatever. And then the real kind of sort of fantasy that I have, which is actually feasible now. There's a project that folks at the U.S. Geological Survey and Trout Unlimited and researchers with WildMe and in Japan have been doing around the ability to identify individual fish from their markings. And so they've done a whole multi-year study.
Some of these pretty unique.
Exactly. So imagine a trout, right? Huh? A fry, a juvenile trout, fingerling, with its little par marks and its dots, right? Let's say a brook trout. They're able to, from that photo, match it to the adult, a year or two later, through machine learning.
Wow.
And so if you think about that, if we can start to really be able to do that reliably, you talked about kind of the issue of handling fish in order to insert a spaghetti tag and then put it back in the water. We may actually be able to eliminate the need for tags altogether in the future.
And then following that, any like GotOne capture of a picture is just another entry in that fish journey log, right? Of that individual fish 7043.
That's right. That's right. That's right. We'll start to collect a global fingerprint database, of unique fish.
Yeah, I think stripers have a unique, and maybe redfish do. And I understand redfish does change their spots, but I've seen some albies with 4 or 5 spots in their belly. They're unique.
Yeah.
Wow, it'd be really amazing if that was the case.
Yeah.
But
and we don't know. I mean, this is all sort of kind of science fiction right now, but we think we can get there. And what's really crazy about AI and about machine learning and where we are today with these new models is these models are starting to be able to learn things like fish identification in ways that we as developers can't even understand. We don't understand there is no algorithm that we as humans can understand for how they're matching those fish.
Right.
It is learning to do that matching through neural networks and through reinforcement learning. And we can see the outcome get better and better, but we can't actually figure out how it's making that decision.
Yeah, there's a lot of that's out there about AI that is booga booga, but there's plenty of other applications that seem like, wow, that just makes it better. We understand striped bass or redfish or whatever it is better,
Yeah.
So the back to the roadmap, I was curious, logs are certainly logs don't lie, but if the angler lies, it's you don't get the kind of data you'd want. I was thinking, so my buddies, I'm having a tough day, but my buddies in the bow crushing it. What do I do with that data?
So right now, so are you talking about when people are actually logging inaccurate data, or are you
made a joke about how the log's only as good as the entries, right? If you make your fish bigger, yes. Plenty of fishermen do that, right? But no, a more serious question is, I have my GotOne account.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is in the now version or would be in the future, or there's a reason we can't do that but I've had days where I'm having a struggle, but the guy in the bow is crushing it, and we're in the same place, so I would think that data would be helpful to inform my struggle.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a whole roadmap around, and I was actually talking to my son about this morning because he's a big fisherman and he's a data analytics and data science major at Emory University. So we talk a lot about this,
From the tree.
and he said, Dad, with the data you have, we could offer through AI and through analytics uh, some really precise recommendations for what you're doing wrong or what you could be doing differently or what should you take with you on the boat under these conditions in order to catch more fish. And so we're definitely starting to look at that. And there are other apps and websites that have tried to do that, but I think that because of the type of data that we're collecting and because of some of the advances around AI and data analytics, I think we can offer much more targeted and actionable insights to anglers about what they could be doing. To your point, why your buddy on the bow is catching fish and you're not, and it may have something all to do with where you are in the water column or the size of the bait or the color or all sorts of other factors. And so that sort of insight to really, very specifically fine tune your fishing is definitely on the roadmap as well. Another thing I wanted to mention is something I'm really eager for is I want GotOne to be able to produce my season almanac. I want it, at the end of the year, or maybe multiple times. You mentioned that in your neck of the woods, you kind of break it down into 10 seasons. And I think that's a great way to think about it is maybe I want to get an almanac for the end of each of those mini seasons that says, hey, here's what worked for you. Here was your best day. Here's where you caught fish. Here's the best optimal water temperature during this period of time. This was the best moon phase. And coming back to something you asked earlier about sort of the free versus the paid model. So GotOne right now is completely free. There's no paid model. There's no advertising. We want anglers to use it. I think some of these features around almanacs, insights, more detailed insights, some of the AI features, ultimately, we probably will have those be available for premium subscription users, but we'll always allow you to use a basic log for free. At some point, I've basically funded this out of my pocket and through the good graces of the Saltwater Guides Association, the Nature Conservancy, and Hatch. But we do need to, and if we're going to keep this expanding and we're going to achieve our vision for this app,
Right.
we need to be able to get some revenue from it too. But we will be, we will always let you do what you can currently do with GotOne for free. That's my commitment.
Yeah, that's great, because I think people would understand that, if there's some additional utility and value, and that actionable insight is the crack that's in this data that people, they'll buy that if they maybe fish enough and are competent at using it and that kind of stuff, and that makes a lot of sense to me. But the idea that this baseline stuff, which is, you've said, helpful at the outset, in the first 2 years of messing around with what you built prototype wise, you realize benefit. It kind of sets the stage for, and the fact, as I said to open the episode, that so many of the folks on my podcast say keep a log.
Yeah.
Right. And I've struggled and I tried and I've start and stop. And, I found in preparing for this, I looked at how many entries I made this year, and it hasn't been very many. And I thought about why, and I'm like, yeah, well, I fish in the morning, then I get off the boat, and my phone rings, and I'm coming here to the water edge, and so it's making it easier, and making it at the point of catch are two big steps toward me solving the problem that I have. And I think of that as, kind of like we kick this off, you begin with the end in mind, and you work your way back. I think the residual benefit here, and I don't mean to dismiss it at all, but I think everybody, there's a whiff on what's in it for me. But if you think about it, I don't know how to say what's in it for striped bass. Anyway, I don't know the with them.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I think that was the thing that has made me most excited about this project is I think the very best apps out there and consumer services are ones that can effectively serve multiple multiple purposes and deliver value to multiple parties. You know, in most consumer apps, that's the user, and then it's some commercial marketing partner. In our case, it's the user and the marine science and fisheries conservation community. And that is really important to me, because that's really why I'm doing this. Is A, I want to be a better fisherman and have more fun fishing and learn more while I'm fishing. But B, I want to know that as a citizen and as a recreational angler with a real vested interest in the health of our fishery, that I can contribute in some way. And like you, Peter, like I've been involved in so many of these, sort of citizen science surveys and studies where it's completely unidirectional. I'm filling out all sorts of information and taking, scales off the fish or otolith samples and sending them somewhere, and I never get anything back. And so this was a way to do something that really made both the angler and the fisheries management community happier and more insightful.
When you think about it, Lou, we've never had more of a technical advantage, between fish finders and weather buoys and better engines and better gear and lighter rods and all kind. We never and sometimes some of this technology just puts more pressure on the fishery.
Yeah.
Here's some technology. I don't know that it will relieve the pressure, but it will inform, which is the knowledge we would need to make adjustments, corrections, modifications, whatever it might be, because that it is something that we love. It is something that we share. It is a public resource, and sometimes being as involved as I have with the Guide Association and other kind of efforts over time, like you say, sometimes I sit there and we're trying to count the fish in the ocean. That sounds kind of like flawed at the start.
Yeah.
That's got to be really hard. So if we can learn the most we can from the ones we interact with, that's got to help. One of the albae data points that I'm aware of anyway was that the last one left Montauk in the middle of November, like you talked about, but then 2 dozen of them arrived at Harker's like 2 weeks later, a week later, in like zip directly, you're like, wow, and it just, the wonder is back. It's not like you'd see that fish finder and that fish on the bottom, the one you're trying to drop a jig to. It's more like the wonder is back and just what amazing creatures all these are.
I love that. And, gosh, think about that, Peter, too. Like, how many arguments we have had as anglers about whether those Harker's fish are the same fish as we get in Montauk or Martha's Vineyard, or for that matter, in Jupiter, Florida, or for that matter, in Europe. And the fact that, this simple study, the algae tagging immediately could answer that question is incredible. And I think about, the management implications of that. So now we know this is a highly migratory species that needs to be managed as a multi-region coastal species rather than managed locally. And so I think rec anglers have to understand that they have the power in their fishing and their data to really drive dramatic outcomes in terms of our ability to manage fish stocks. And that really, as a data guy and a fisherman, that makes me very, very happy to know that we can help support that.
Out of what you've built here, and the crazy amount of potential that's still inherent in it. I appreciate free and the fact you made it free. And one of the things we're going to do as Saltwater Edge is we run a tournament in the fall called the Albae Shootout, and another one called November to Remember, I think is the name we settled on. But anyway, we're going to use GotOne as a way to make an entry. And because I think that the data that we collect as recreational anglers is us offering a solution instead of throwing up our hands or pointing to everybody else who's doing it wrong. We got to step up, and this tool allows us to do that. So we'll be talking about that, you and me, maybe 10 minutes after this is over. I'll give you
that sounds good. I can't wait.
We wrap it up with the questions I asked all my guests. I know you fish both lures and flies, and probably like me have given the chance you can use a fly rod, but you're multidiscipline. So what are two of the lures or flies you'd recommend? Let's just say we're now it's August, so we've got both of us have albies on the brain. We swap past each other sometimes, but let's focus on the fall. What are two lures or flies? Could be three if you want that you make good use of. Maybe your data tells you something. If
Yeah.
you,
Yeah.
take.
Yeah. So the data does tend to confirm what my intuitions have been about this in the past, but for flies, I would say, especially this time of year, I always have a variety of half and halves, so half clouds or half deceivers in my box, and I like to tie them with white and pink and olive, or white, pink, and chartreuse. But I'll have some with really big maxi eyes that I can fish to get way down in the column. They're great imitations of those big sand eels or even small bunker. And
At Montauk, right? The big sand eels. Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, all around Montauk and around Block Island, fish is great around the Southwest Ledge. The in recent years, I've been using a fly that my buddy, you know him, a local guide here in the Hamptons, David Blinken, created, called the jellyfish fly, which is actually a splay-tailed. So it has sort of a hackle tail, but there's splay kind of almost like tarpon style, and then it uses SF blend for a wing and underneath to really give it a little bit of flash, but really sort of swims and suspends in the water and has a lot of movement in the current, even when it's not moved fast. And I tend to use those now over my traditional epoxy flies, even for albies. They love that fly. They really go crazy after it. Yeah. So yeah, it's about anywhere from 3 inches to maybe 1.5 inches.
Okay, so it's got a squiddy feel to me, the way you're describing.
Yes. Yeah. And then the third one is I'm always also got a bunch of Popovic style hollow flies or beast flies, something that has more of a tubular body, so that it doesn't look completely flat from the bottom. So for instance, even with tuna fishing right now, a lot of times, even with the sand eels, which we tend to think of as being fairly lean, they're actually cylindrical, and these tuna are coming up from underneath. Even when they're feeding on the surface, they're coming from underneath, and you need a little bit of profile to it. And so I find that that hollow fly style of tying really provides a lot of dimensionality to flies when there's a lot of bait in the water. So those are 3 flies that I'll always have with me.
Sounds great. So I usually ask for 2 resources, but I'm only going to ask you for one, because one of them's GotOne. Sure. Is there another resource that you make good use of, in planning or some aspect of making you a better fisherman?
Well, so I actually will give you a couple because it's hard to answer with just one. I actually find Instagram is incredibly valuable as a tool. And it's not even that I look at any particular fish, but I'm kind of scrolling through to see, because I know who among my friends is in what region, and it gives me kind of a fluid dynamic sense of where the fish are at any given time. And that's how I use it, more than looking at individual photos.
And I imagine it inspires your fly tying too. There's some incredible fly tires.
Yes, absolutely. And then I'm really pretty religious at looking at Windfinder and Windy for wind, direction, speed, predictions. And then, now that I've been fishing more offshore, I've been using the Terrafin app a lot for sea surface temperature, and to really understand where the breaks and the fingers are. And that's been a critical tool for my offshore success, and even for inshore success. Because out here, like this time of year, the water temperature can vary. If you go to Block, we were talking about Southwest Ledge, between the Southwest Ledge and east of the wind farm, the temperature can vary by 10 degrees.
Wow, I had no idea. Yeah. Okay. Um, you know, two tips to improve. I think we should probably answer this in the context of using data to help inform your fishing, create those educated guesses. The other thing I wanted to share with you is I've kept a list of bait observations since I can't remember when, by month, different baits I've seen in different places, and again,
That's
data to distill real insights, except for know that the peanut bunker this size here and that size there by month. But that kind of I'm curious if you have any thoughts on how someone would best use, maybe that's the way to frame it, best use GotOne. One or two things you'd think would be the big takeaways. Let's say you got 150 fish in there, or I don't know, it's probably hard to get much out of the beginning of it, but you got to build a database.
Yeah, I think that for me, the things I've been most interested in past the most recent seasons have been really understanding prevalence of the fish that I've caught and landed by moon phase. And by moon phase, I mean both illumination and stage.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, you can get a 50% or, let's call it a 30% waning gibbous and a 30% waxing. Right. And those have similarities and differences. And so I kind of map all that data out, and we're going to actually create a pre-created report for that through GotOne. But I look at it on the x-axis from literally from full moon to new moon to full moon, with the illumination waning and waxing in between that, or waxing and waning, whichever way, however I did it. And I found that to be incredibly interesting. And then if you map that to time of year, fascinating what you'll find. So that's one. Another one is water temperature by species and location. That's been really useful to me too, because it's a high degree of correlation there.
Yeah, what a tough get that would be otherwise, right?
Almost impossible. Almost impossible. You do it by kind of, again, if you're a guide who's out there every single day, you get the intuitive sense of it. But for most of us who aren't fishing that much, real hard to get that data.
Yeah. Well, Lou, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I think, we're going to encourage folks with our tournaments to use GotOne. Encourage anybody who has a long-term view towards their fishing and their desire to leave, something for the next guy. That if we as recreational anglers can provide data, and Luyen's product here will help do that. And sounds like the free version's a great start, and I can see real compelling reasons to want to learn more about the premium version if and when. But I recognize as well that your motivation is you were actually, I was remembering this morning, you were at the very first sort of guide association powwow we had in New York City, just a half a dozen people.
Yep.
And it's a challenge that's in front of us as recreational anglers, right? And here's a chance to step up, let alone, and everyone should be selfish in this way and better inform your own fishing to make you a better angler. That's kind of one thing it does. And the other thing it does is it creates the data set that fisheries managers have been looking for. And that's exciting. And what good can come of that is exciting as well. So Lou, thanks for the effort and the time. And thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Peter. A lot of fun. I look forward to your using GotOne and to your listeners using GotOne, and give us feedback on how it's going for you.